Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 291 of our regular shows, and we're recording this one on May 25th, 2025. This is the official podcast for the fan site avatarthelastairbender.online.com, and I'm going to be your main host, Morgan Airspeed Prime. Joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So we've got a pretty important show here. We've got some pretty big news to cover here, important for Avatar fans. In addition to, we'll be reviewing two episodes of Avatar and Korra. So for Korra, we're going to be doing K305 The Metal Clan. And for Avatar, we're going to be doing 218 The Earth King. But we have to start with the news here, of which we have some pretty important stuff. Now, a few of these things are all interlinked together with the way they kind of ended up kind of rolling out. So about 2 weeks ago, out of nowhere, really, we got this random piece of information that for a while we didn't really know what to make of it. Studio Mir announced randomly that they were working with Paramount Animation on a project, and when you go into it, people initially translated stuff, and so it said one thing, then, they have an official English language version of this. What's it actually saying here? It turns out Studio Mir have actually come on board to participate in the production of The Legend of Aang, The Last Airbender, so the first movie. I think initially a lot of us felt that, is this a new movie they're working on? Are they movie 2 animation studio? But very kind of confusing situation there. It doesn't really have a lot of information, ultimately just that they're happy to work on Avatar. Paramount are happy to have them as an animation studio on board. Flying Bark Animation in the middle of all this are not mentioned at all. They link to some other stuff on the kind of Korean version of the article to the fact that they do have job listings up for 2D and 3D animators. So they are building up staff to work on this movie that last we heard has finished animation production. So tons of confusion surrounding this one in terms of what does this mean? We'll get to the in-depth speculation when we cover the bigger piece of news up next, but just Greg, what were your overall thoughts when you saw this piece of news that Studio Mir are back to work on this first movie?
Yeah, no, I think like many people, I was quite confused to hear this. I mean, it's definitely cool to see that they're back on work on this since, they're a pretty busy studio and they have, a bunch of popular projects going on now, some that have come out and stuff. So, they're definitely up there, and I think everyone have them back on board, the creators as well as the fans. But yeah, it does sort of come out of, left field, thinking about, how we already thought the production was going, and stuff seemed to be going, at least initially as smooth as can be, considering how long it's been taking.
Yeah, so that came out, and again, it was just Studio Mir themselves that posted about this. They have a quote from Paramount in their article, but it felt like it wasn't really reported outside of just they themselves acknowledging it.
Yeah.
Then, just last week and a few days ago, we got the kind of big announcement we were kind of waiting for, and that is finally Paramount, Avatar Studios, Avatar Legends, acknowledging the movie for the first time in forever, really the first time publicly ever, really, to the point where we also have, along with this, a full-on official Instagram page for the movie, Legend of Aang movie, on Instagram. They even linked to it on the Avatar Legends Instagram. But the news is, we got the logo for the movie. They confirmed the title, of course, Legend of Aang, The Last Airbender. But we get only in theaters October 9th, 2026. So we get a pretty significant delay for the movie from January 30th all the way to October 9th. And again, keep in mind, we did have an October 2025 date originally. So it's now 2 dates combined for a year, give or take, of delays. I think it's fair to say we were probably all expecting a delay of some sort because marketing hadn't started yet. We got way less than we thought we were going to get from CinemaCon, and I think everyone felt something was up. and either they're waiting for a specific moment or there is a delay. Delay has been confirmed, but at least for me, it's a lot bigger than I thought it would be. Now, the other piece of news we just talked about maybe explains a few things, but we'll get into that in a second. But what were your thoughts in terms of like your expectations for some sort of a delay coming up versus what the delay that we actually got was?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I had a solid number in my mind for how long possible delay would actually be. I definitely did sort of expect one like many people just because of how less information we've gotten sort of over time. It just seems like things weren't really moving the way that we thought it was. And with everything else, coming to light, it definitely felt like that was sort of our with, the what everyone was sort of coming to the conclusion about. I don't know. I think I would probably think technically probably like, maybe 3 to 6 month delay would probably be what I would expect unless it was really sort of like near production, which of course we sort of thought it was. So considering that, I probably would have thought it would have been a lot less, but factoring everything else that we now know currently, extended delay doesn't seem too unexpected with all the other information that we have now.
It's also maybe worth mentioning as well that this was not the only Paramount animated movie delayed. The upcoming, I think, second TMNT animated movie that they're doing got, I'm pretty sure it was like a full year delay, or like it's a bigger delay than the Avatar movie gets. Now that's from like 2026 to 2027, so that's even kind of further out. But still, they did delay both things kind of super heavily, and that kind of needs to be acknowledged here. So, just before we move on to the full speculation about connecting the dots on it, I think we have to talk about the logo. We did get the logo here, so there was a visual finally. So yeah, what the logo is, if you haven't seen it, basically it is the Legend of Aang in mostly kind of orange font, though it gets darker in kind of gradient as you go down, though it's kind of blue towards the end of the G. In newish font, kind of like paintbrush style font, but different. That the A is over an Airbender logo in blue, and then it just has below, underneath the Aang, the last Airbender in relatively plain text. I really actually like, as just a text logo, the Legend of Aang bit of it, but I do think there is some random elements of this. It does feel like the last Airbender, like it is in the title, is just kind of thrown in there randomly. And then the positioning of the Airbender logo is kind of odd to me because it's mostly obscured by the A. There's a rough attempt to sort of like have the parts of the A go through the center of the swirls, but like I'm not sure it works super well, but it's nice enough. It does kind of stand out a decent bit. But what are your thoughts on the logo for the movie?
Yeah, I think it's fine. I mean, for the flat versions of these logos, there's I don't know. There's only so much you can really do with it. At least they, have it to be like a new sort of brush font that, sort of fits with what we've seen, sort of the calligraphy, sort of art style that we've known from the Avatar universe. So I think it's in line with what we've seen so far. It is a bit different, which I think is probably good. It'll be interesting to see how it's sort of fully realized, in the movie and stuff like that. Especially with it sort of overlaid over the Airbender symbol as well. I think that definitely, I can see the point where that seems like it was purposely placed there, but it also, covers up a lot of it. I don't know if off center would have been better, but sure they went through like a zillion iterations to get this. Definitely can understand the idea of the last Airbender seeming like it's a bit sort of thrown on there. I don't know, maybe if they did more with the gradient, it would have felt like it more fit in place there since it doesn't quite, have the coloring with Aang. But otherwise, I think it's fine. I don't think it's like, the end all to be all with this, having this logo here, or that's, showing that it's the end because it's not like the most perfect logo. I don't know. Sometimes I think people are a little bit too hyped on it, but it's cool. It works.
Mm-hmm. Then we get into the idea of like, okay, why has the movie been so heavily delayed, given that, like we've discussed from CinemaCon, apparently they said it at the panel there that the movie had finished animation production the week prior, which at this point is like a good few weeks ago, obviously. Now, the Studio Mir thing is kind of particularly odd in the sense that, well, if they were finished animation production, do you bring a major animation studio on board where they are doing a big hiring spree to bring people on board. And borderline, they're talking about the fact that they're doing a lot of animation potentially on this thing. And I think everyone has basically read this as like, this is not like normal or expected. Like, you have stuff with animation production where other studios will come on board at times. But for the individual kind of movie at this point, given where we thought they were in production, this surely has to mean that there's some sort of production problems happening here. That they did finish animation production, but does that mean it was like successful or met the quality standard? And they've now reacted to that in the month since by bringing Studio Mir on board to, I don't know, fix things. We don't know. There's so much that is speculation here, but I think it's difficult to read this as just, yes, everything is going smoothly, normal, there's no problem whatsoever, when it does kind of read like there is a problem without them admitting it, which I don't think they probably ever would admit to it. We'd probably have to wait for insiders to kind of maybe properly reveal that there are actually production problems. But what are your thoughts on that? Connecting all the kind of pieces together. We also probably have to add in Annecy. The reason that Annecy was probably like that information disappeared is also because of this to a certain degree as well. You can also maybe connect the dots with Seven Havens being a 2027 planned release as like, oh, it makes a bit more sense now, October and then some point in 2027. So this was always, I think, planned over the last few months to be like this. But what do you think has happened adding everything together?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a lot to sort of figure it out, and like you said, we won't, probably if ever know sort of the real behind the scenes. Like, is this really animation, reshoots, reproduction, which is a pretty big sort of endeavor since, for animation, everything is always sort of like pre-planned layout, storyboards, and all that sort of stuff. So the fact that they're coming down to this point and they're having to have another team jump in, presumably to help with this, first project, I definitely can see the reason why people are a bit sort of down on this sort of news, because that's not typically what happens. Usually once you get to this point in the production, then you're pretty much set, because it's a lot to sort of go back and redo things. Even in live action, it's a lot to go back and do things. So animation just makes it sometimes even worse sometimes. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wonder if this was sort of like, maybe they sort of overestimated where they were in the production when they were saying things, and they weren't really as far as what they sort of led on to believe, which, I don't know, that seems like a big faux pas to actually sort of like say that and have that sort of put out there in different news outlets and stuff like that. But it definitely feels like we're taking, a couple steps back in terms of the overall sort of production and the timelines of things. Like, I don't know if, something like the studio wasn't up to it or something, or, they just ran out of time, or they had maybe too many projects since, you mentioned earlier the TMT one is also delayed. So I don't know, maybe there's just, general mismanagement and stuff going on, which none of these are, good outlooks to have, right? Like, that's not, sort of what we want to hear about a production that we've sort of been waiting for a number of years here. So I don't know. There's a lot of different avenues that could be, said with what they're actually sort of doing here. I just hope that at least from this point forward, now that they have another studio in the mix, that it can continue going towards the right direction, which, I don't know, we've sort of seen this happen before with Korra, right? So, like, this isn't really a particularly new thing, and even just the industry in general, like, it's not like, something that was never happened before. It's just that we're following it in real time, so it feels a lot worse.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because like we just know so little information. Like, everyone is speculating about this to the point where like some people are interpreting this as like Mur are coming in to like reanimate the entire movie, which I don't think is really what's happening here. But at the same time, we don't really know. Now, I don't know, is there anything weird about the fact that like in the Studio Mur announcement, it doesn't mention that like they're coming on to help Flying Bark or work with them in some regard or anything like that. Especially if they're being like given specific parts of the movie to do or something like that. I think that is like, okay, coming on as an animation studio to do these cuts of animation make sense. We just don't really know. I suppose the question now is like, okay, what does this mean for like future projects? Because we still don't know who the animation studio is on Seven Havens, and then we don't know what the situation is with, say, like the second movie. We still don't know if it's like an Aang trilogy or if they're going to swap eras between movies. Like, our studio Mur ramping up to properly come back on board for Avatar by helping out with this movie, and then they'll be the studio for the next one. I'm assuming that might be kind of part of the plan, just because it kind of seems like that's kind of what they maybe wanted to do. And now that Mur are slightly freed up from other projects, they have the opportunity to come back on board. I just don't really know. Either way, it set everything back quite heavily in the sense that expectations for like the rest of this year in particular really kind of fall away, where like San Diego Comic-Con coming up now feels a little bit like, well, I guess publishing panel is the top thing once again, but they do have other stuff going on, like, Avatar Magic the Gathering. They're probably going to want to talk about it here. The toy line, they're probably going to want to talk about it here. I guess this is going to be more of the 20th anniversary San Diego Comic-Con, but I suppose you also have to acknowledge that New York Comic-Con becomes slightly better timed for them to talk about things a year out, but it does mean that the next San Diego Comic-Con is going to be like so close to the movie that, like, might they still say something at this one just with the way the timing works out? I don't really know. Because the slight other point we maybe need to mention is that Braving the Elements, the podcast, season 4 did premiere this week. So we got the Mike and Brian episode. Episode itself is fine, but it's just about like chit chat about production on Korra, basically leading into book 1. They got asked about Avatar Studios at the end, like the floor was given to them to say anything, and they didn't really give a response. It was a pretty no comment style response, very similar to what they've said before. Stuff is coming, you'll see it one day. They just went into full kind of PR mode the second they actually had to kind of openly talk about things. And there's no real, I think, nitpicking apart their answer to try and find anything there. It's just they didn't give an answer. They didn't mention the movie, the series, any of them by names, any of the public details that are out there. To be fair, we don't know when the podcast was recorded, but I don't think it was that long ago that they couldn't say anything. They just don't want to say anything. So I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts on that? Like with regards to like Mike and Brian's podcast comments, or just how you think some of the upcoming events are going to go, like San Diego Comic-Con, New York Comic-Con, with the new dates in mind?
I think you're pretty much spot on in terms of like when we would get any sort of information. I mean, I don't know. I think honestly for me, I wasn't really expecting anything at this Comic-Con for San Diego. It just seemed, I don't know, it didn't seem close enough to the original release date of the beginning of next year. So I don't know. I know people were really thinking there was going to be stuff there, but I don't know. It just didn't feel like that was going to be it. And now we can sort of see that that's definitely probably not going to happen. So yeah, it definitely feels like publishing will be, the key thing again, even if there is other stuff sort of in the works. And I don't know even if New York Comic Con this year would, have anything really to sort of show for it. I mean, I'm sure they'll have like, production stuff if they wanted to show, but I don't know. That doesn't seem like something that they would do. So I don't know. I wouldn't expect anything until next year's San Diego Comic Con for anything at all. If that, I don't know. I mean, Comic Con would definitely be, that's too late, of course. But I don't know. We'll definitely have to wait and see when things come out. And yeah, for the podcast, yeah, I mean, no, there's no surprise that they wouldn't say anything when things are still going, even if they, had the idea to say something. So no surprise there. Just cool to see that they're on the podcast as they've been on the before.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the other thing is that this does kind of change a lot of other stuff. Like the toy line now suddenly goes to being like, oh, do they have like 4 or 5 waves to get to like movie stuff late next year? Like that's a pretty big kind of pushback, because they're probably now going to have to be quite cautious when it comes to, like, I'm assuming they have toys designed, probably even in production, given how far out they need to do that. So toy leaks feel like they might be on the cards a little bit more now with this delay. And that could be an interesting one. Will they delay the toy line? the whole point of it is like it's the 20th anniversary thing, so they have to release it this year. It's just timing it, I suppose. Even some of like the publishing stuff, like that comic miniseries, if it was maybe meant to be more of a media tie-in for the movie, that definitely I think gets held back. And then we don't know what the grander plans are kind of beyond that. The novels seem like they're set in stone in terms of like they're not trying to touch on the more modern stuff, the upcoming stuff. They're leaning into the past content. But the comics feel like, okay, one shots, but beyond that, what's going on here? That's the interesting point. But we'll move on to the next piece of news, and it is the kind of big one as well, and that is Avatar Legends Voyage of the Unity Kickstarter has launched. It's been up for a couple of days now, and obviously it was funded basically immediately. I think it took like 38 minutes or something like that. They had a 50,000 goal, and they're now at 392,000, so nearly 400,000 here. We've hit a few stretch goals. 2,231 backers, still 25 days to go. And they did a few things ahead of this, like there was a preview of the Kickstarter, which I guess we can maybe talk about a little bit. But all the information is up here. It's obviously doing super, super well, given how niche of a thing it was, and it was never going to do the crazy numbers the original Kickstarter did, but it's doing well for what it is, of course. So to quickly recap the information here, digital tier is $29 just for the digital stuff. The standard physical edition, which is basically just the booklets and the Roku era map, is $60. The deluxe edition adds in the GM screen and a slightly different box, and it jumps up to $100. The Legendary Edition jumps up to $230 and adds in a different box once again, a set of Avatar coins, a case for the map, a bending scroll, in-world handouts, and another map. And then there's the Dragon Edition, where basically a couple extra scrolls get added in, including the Dancing Dragon scroll. There have been a bunch of extra stretch goals. Of the 4 that have been hit already, and I suppose the 5th, which we're just about to hit. 4 of the first 5 are just adding cards to a set and basically new pieces of art, with one of them being a new scroll that you can buy if you want to, or choose as part of any of the tiers that have scrolls. The newest one that has just been added as a stretch goal is actually available to everyone. So finally, after all these stretch goals, there's one that fits everyone. Adds foil, spot gloss treatments to all the booklets, and the world map is going to get a material upgrade, which we don't know what it is just yet. So we'll go over some of the kind of more details of the content stuff in just a second here. But what are your thoughts just on, I suppose, the more kind of business kind of financials of this, and how do you think a lot of the tiers look, that sort of thing?
I mean, overall, I think it's fine for what they're going for this type of Kickstarter. Like you said, it is sort of like a niche thing. So the fact that they have, it's sort of it's well laid out, and with Roku, who has become I think more popular as a character recently. It feels sort of like in line with that. I like some of the items that they have here. I know there are some people who are upset with some of the things that they've sort of mentioned that they haven't sort of included or not fully included. So there is some stuff about that to go into for people who are, sort of debating things. But overall, it seems pretty good. I mean, people seem to be into it. It money so quickly, which I guess maybe isn't too surprising, because even if it is sort of a niche thing, there's a lot of people that are sort of like into it. And so far, all of these type of ones, which I know in like overall, it's not something that you might not see like in person a lot, but there are many people that are into it. So it's cool to see it get through. The art is always good, and the stories, even if they're not sort of like canon, are interesting the way that they sort of tell it here. So it's cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think some of the problems with this, like I said, are I think the stretch goals have been a bit disappointing ultimately, a lot of them so far. And I don't know, like, I have no sense for like what it's going to be at the end. Like, is it going to hit more like 1 million, or is it just barely going to get over maybe like 500,000? It's hard to say, because it has super slowed down after the first 3 days, but that kind of always happens with Kickstarters. but
Yeah.
the momentum maybe to get specific stretch goals maybe doesn't quite seem to be here, because they're just like 5 new cards, and they've been a bit weird about explaining that no, this also means that like new art will be added to the booklets as well, and that's kind of been like a no, it's still good for you too type thing, without some of the communication being super strong. Tons of confusion about like how many scrolls do you get with the Dragon Edition, to the point where I think it was clarified, then they got themselves confused, and the wording is all weird because I think they're not allowed to change certain parts of the Kickstarter once it goes live, and that's been a bit weird, especially because scrolls are getting added in, and none of the tiers just give you all the scrolls, so you always have to make a choice, and the more that get added in, the more will be kind of left out that you have to add in as add-ons, and it's kind of confusing. From the preview, they listened to feedback on the 2 higher tiers, because the pricing was just way too high for what the stuff was. So the Legendary Edition dropped by $20, the Dragon Edition dropped by $50, and they added in another bending scroll that you get. The problem for me, though, is that the Deluxe Edition from the preview, they actually took out the coin pouch. The coin pouch was originally part of the Deluxe Edition, and they just took that out. And I asked them about it, and they just gave me like probably the worst response imaginable, which is just they literally just said, we listened to feedback from the preview, that explains why stuff changed from the preview. And I'm kind of like, wait, what? Like, did you hear what I said to you? That like you took out an item. Who gave you feedback to take that out while keeping the price the same? So there's stuff like that. All the add-ons except for the coin pouch got bumped up in price from the preview, which again was just a few days before the Kickstarter went live. And then probably the biggest maybe debate point in the comments is, why are they not offering the booklets as a combined hardcover? Lots of people, including myself, asked them about this, and they've given answers, but they've never just said, no, it's not, we are not going to offer this as a hardcover. It's always been, we made this choice because of this reason, and the reason is just the booklets are easier at the table, which is a bit like weird given that it's this crazy big box of stuff that like comes with scrolls and stuff like that depending on what one you get. So it's a pretty weak explanation. But then people found out that like a few months beforehand on like the Reddit, they basically responded to this as well and said that actually because of our like licensing deal or whatever, we're only allowed to print them as booklets. So they're not actually allowed to do a hardcover. But then why aren't they just saying that in the comments on the Kickstarter? Because that like solves the issue. If it's a licensing issue, there we go. Like there's no point complaining because they came into this unable to do that. But the comments read like they're unwilling to do it. So that's kind of weird, just out of like consistency with the other stuff. And I think there's now a growing sense that, oh, is how this is going to work is that like in the future, because they're going to want to keep all the material active for the RPG, is Magpie then going to like print their own copy of this that's in a hardcover like a couple of months or like a year after the Kickstarter maybe? That's what people are kind of thinking. But again, I don't know how the licensing works on that, because I think Beadle and Graham have actually like been involved in the writing on a lot of this stuff, so it's theirs, but they're working with Magpie, and it's a very confusing situation. I don't know, what are your thoughts on some of the kind of, I suppose, feedback that's come in about some of this?
Yeah, no, that's very confusing, the way that they're sort of reacting to things. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know, hardcovers always seems like the thing that people are really sort of into, especially if you're, maybe not particularly going to play the game, but you would like to sort of have it as like a collection element. Hardcovers is always like a thing that stands out that you can like show off and stuff. So it's unfortunate that they don't have that in there, or they didn't really consider that. I guess, I don't know, maybe they're more sort of player game sort of focus, and that was sort of their idea going to the licensing deal. But like you're saying, to not just say that definitely feels like a missed opportunity to just clear up some things. So yeah, I'm not really sure about that. It would be interesting if they can sort of like, I don't know, do like reprints and stuff like that, where they do have, things in other formats and stuff like that, like how they do the comics and everything. So I don't know. I don't know if that's something that, is done with these type of games.
Yeah, it's an odd one, definitely, because I think there was a lot of excitement, and then like some of that excitement has kind of been drained out of it, just because yeah, the stretch goals are not like the most exciting stuff overall, and some of the comments, responses to things haven't been like amazing, especially because there seems to be this kind of almost like running idea that like, oh, but this is the way we always do things. We always do it as booklets, but like definitely some of their other projects clearly have hardcover books as part of them. So, and then it's their first Avatar Legends thing. It's their first time. A lot of Avatar fans are experiencing Beetle and Grimm, so I'm not sure you can just go to like, oh, it's always done this way as the immediate kind of answer. We'll talk briefly about some of the content here, because we finally delve a little bit more into what the story is kind of going to be about. Like, we've known for a while since the core book came out what the Unity is with regards to the Roku era, but now we get more of a sense that like, oh yeah, it was, if you read the core book, it's that the Unity is a thing that is like about to happen. It's being prepared. It's going to launch. The nations are preparing for how they're going to deal with like everyone coming together on the Unity, and this is finally our first time seeing stories of it when it's actually kind of launched overall. So they cover the idea that there's there's 5 adventures. The first one is basically as the Unity gets underway, there's a stowaway, but it's mostly an introductory story introducing you to the crew and passengers, that sort of idea. The second one is all about Natsuo Island, where some kind of crazy, kind of mysterious stuff begins to go down, referencing the conflict between the Fire Nation and the Earth Kingdom over the island. And of course, Natsuo Island is related to like the Yang Chen novels and Project Unanimity to a certain degree, so there's some fun stuff there. The third one is out at sea. The captain makes some mistakes while a storm is happening, and it seems like a lot of the passengers want to replace the captain, and politics on board, and that seems kind of interesting. The fourth one is set on the Fire Nation during the Festival of Zito, and it's basically helping to avoid this city's autocratic ruler killing a young wounded dragon, because the hunting dragons has just been implemented. And then the last one is at a port near Ba Sing Se. There's a pirate attack on the Unity, and it's near the Serpent's Pass as well. So some very fun story ideas here. They also, as you go through the campaign, it covers the idea of like, here is the name of the leader of the delegation for each of the 4 nations, and probably most interesting of all, we get the details of who the 4 legend NPC characters are going to be for this game. So these are the ones that are going to get art, full character bios, stuff like that. So we get Teak, full name unpronounceable. I've never heard anyone actually say it. Teak Rig An Yan Ig. I'm not sure. But this is obviously the rich person making the Unity happen. We have a brand new character we've never heard about before, Minister Lanzig, who is assigned to the Unity by Queen Guozun of Omashu. And he's always fought against Dao Fei, so that's interesting. Ernun Ryoshan, very cool. We do have 2 pieces of art of her that we could see in the campaign already, so we knew about that one kind of ahead of time, basically. It is confirmed that it is Ryoshan. And then Uzuku Yuyan. So the Yuyan character from the Roku era, she's also going to get a piece of art and a full bio. And final point on this is that I think in the little banner that says reward items, I think that character is Teak, but I'm not sure if that's confirmed. But what are your thoughts on how the like story content of this stuff is shaping up?
That's very interesting. I mean, it seems really well played out. They have, the sort of setup for how your PC, your player characters are going to sort of interact with, the sort of story going on and how you can sort of shape it. So no, I like it. I mean, I think, the idea of Unity, I think has always been sort of like a interesting, plot point and how that's sort of working in the Avatar world and, with Roku and everything. So I don't know, it feels like they're playing off the right stuff in order to give, people a fun time when playing the game and stuff like that. So no, I think this is pretty cool, the 5 parts that they have laid out.
And then probably kind of slightly unfortunately, the most kind of maybe shocking part of this is that estimated delivery on this stuff, September 2026. The preview said July, but either way, okay, September 2026. Given that this is basically, as far as we're aware, the next Magpie content, it means that it's going to be 2 years between releases. Like the Uncle Iroh Adventure Guide was around this time, 2024. And when we finally get this, I guess the digital version will be like a little bit early. Maybe, I think they said that in the comments. Still, a year and a half, 2 years in between releases. And I do wonder what Magpie themselves are doing, given that they're only like assisting on this one. Where is the Spirit World book? And this is where, again, publishing panels are going to be important to see if they say anything. But based on what I've heard previously, they don't tend to say too much during the publishing panels. But what are your thoughts on that? Like, just I suppose the release schedule for Avatar Legends overall.
I mean, overall, it's always sort of been, I don't know, up in sort of the air in terms of when we're sort of going to get things. But yeah, this does feel like it's a bit sort of extended, which, I mean, I get it. They have to do a lot of sort of production to sort of get these elements in it. I don't know. It seems like a lot. I don't know. Maybe there wasn't sort of as much extra planning on this, or because, it's a different, group doing it, that they need a little bit more sort of ramp up time for the actual production of, the elements and stuff like that. I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, we've had these a lot at this point, so I don't know. It almost feels like it's a regular thing to have one of these things come out. Which, I don't know. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a bad thing. But I don't know. It feels like there's this different sort of time scaling, and I don't know if that's part of like the the overall Avatar sort of production studios of how they're sort of doing things to come out. Doesn't feel like this needs to like tie in with anything, so it doesn't seem like there's necessarily something, another project that's sort of like holding it back. It's just itself and its own sort of production issues. So I don't know. I'm not too sure about that.
Yeah, definitely a weird one. But yeah, it'll be exciting to see how it eventually does by the end. Like I said, the stretch goals currently, we're going to get the 400,000 one, I guess, in a day or two, depending on how it goes. 475k is the upgraded covers and world map. It feels like we should be able to get that. The picture clearly suggests there is at least one more stretch goal, if not more. But it's so difficult to judge how exactly it's going to go. But yeah, the final question, I suppose, is just, how much more do you see this making, given that it's just at about 400,000 at the moment? Where do you see it going with 25 days still?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of time, and there's always like that, like end of the campaign sort of push that sometimes can get it up a little bit more at the end as well. So I don't know. I mean, it definitely does feel like it's slowed down from the initial push. I definitely could see it getting all of their current sort of stretch goals. I'm not sure if I see it getting 500k, but I think last time I said something like that, it clearly blew past whatever I thought it was before. So I don't know. Hopefully it'll get more.
Yeah, because I think I was kind of worried after maybe the first day, but then like it did okay day 2, but then it actually did, I think, even better on day 3. So this could be weird in terms of how they go, but we'll keep an eye on how it actually runs. Final piece of news is Netflix Avatar. So the big announcement that they made was that they publicly stated that season 2 is wrapped filming kind of production, and season 3 is now officially in production. Stuff with a lot of the main actors, where they switched from the green 2 hats to the red 3 hats. So that was kind of fun. But the more significant one, because we already knew that was the case, they're just making it super public, is that we have some new cast members for both season 2 and 3. So what they did here is they split it up. So specifically for season 3, kind of only, we have John Briones as Pian Dao and Tantu Cardinal as Hama. So we have confirmation here. Pian Dao and Hama are going to be coming in season 3, which is the point we expect them to come in. So that's like accurate. But it does mean for sure that we're doing something with regards to the Puppet Master, which is an important episode, but it is a kind of more of a standalone episode ultimately. But they kind of had to touch on it to a certain degree. How they'll tie it in with the timing and how much they have will be interesting. And then they're clearly introducing all the White Lotus characters. It's just like, are they going to do full Sokka's Master, or is this mostly here for crazy fun Order of White Lotus battle at the end? But what are your thoughts, just to get, I suppose, confirmation on these 2 characters for season 3 and their actors?
I mean, I think that's great. I mean, I think those are like, very popular episodes, even if they are, somewhat standalone, but they, they fit together well with the overall story of things. So it would have been, too bad if they didn't include those in some capacity. Like anything else with the live action, you wonder how much of them they're actually going to have in it. Like, are they actually going to dedicate, the full episodes to that? I would highly doubt that, just because of the way, the amount of episodes that they typically have and how they flow the sort of story and stuff like that. I can't see them, dedicating full episodes to that, part of the story in any sort of capacity. But I think that the fact that they have them in there means they're gonna, include them in some way, form, or fashion, even if it is just for bigger effect later on. So no, I'm glad that they have them in there.
And then new season 2 casting announcements to add to the stuff that we had from before. So we have Terry Chen as Zhang, Dolly DeLeon as Lowen Lee, Lily Gao as Ursa, Madison Hu as Faye, and Daichin Lockman as Yang Chen. So Faye is a character that doesn't exist as far as we're aware. So that's either an original character or an unnamed character getting a new name. Not really sure. I don't think we have anything to really speculate on that. Zhang and Yang Chen don't make really appearances in book 2 necessarily. Like Yang Chen is like part of the lineup of past avatars, but in the role where like they're debuting the character here, they're new because they missed the opportunity. The timing on Zhang is going to be very, very weird. And then, what are they using Yang Chen for? So I suppose we'll start there. Yeah, what are your thoughts on, any thoughts on Faye, Yang Chen, and Zhang?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think like who that would be or if it's a rename, but I mean, I think that's too vague as is. But I mean, as far as Zhang and Yang Chen, I mean, characters themselves having them, I think, is great because they're cool characters and they play a role. Yang Chen, as an avatar and what they can bring to the table, sort of the flashbacks and sort of that and sort of communicating with their past lives. I mean, there's a lot you can do with that, but how much is that going to come into play? That definitely feels like if the character, and it's hard to tell just from knowing that they have an actor how much of an actual role they'll actually have. Like, I don't know how prominent they're going to actually going to be there. It's cool nonetheless. I think that's, Yang Chen is now a very popular character due to the book. So, I think, it makes sense that they would try to include her more so in the story, given her recent popularity. And for Zhang, I don't know. I mean, I guess I could see how he could fit into other parts of the story, depending on how they sort of tweak things. I mean, it definitely feels like something where people are going to look at that very sort of critically in terms of how they're doing the story and the writing, which I don't think there's a way to avoid that. People are already very critical of the writing in the story, so it'll be interesting to see how that really sort of plays out in the end. But the character stuff, I think, is cool that they have him.
Yeah, Zhang especially because, like, Zhao's gone now, so you can't do the conflict between those two unless you do a flashback, but that kind of seems weird with where they're going to time it. Katara already knows about her healing, so they've taken away, like, him being the one who kind of tells her about that. So it kind of feels like, I guess we still want to have Aang attempt to learn firebending before he actually learns firebending. So he has the failure. So I guess they're just going to do that part of it. Or are they want to introduce him because he's Order of the White Lotus. I think you could use him as maybe the White Lotus contact that like Zuko and Iroh do, replacing, what's his name, Fung, I think it is, from like the desert. That could be something just as a way to introduce him and like to have those two characters interact beforehand. That's maybe a simple way to do it. That way you don't have to cast someone as the random White Lotus guy for one episode because it's your Zhang. That might be something. Yang Chen is interesting because they're obviously doing it on the basis of like you have to go visit the statue. It's very kind of set in stone, kind of how they do the past life stuff here. And there is a very clear giant Yang Chen statue in the Eastern Air Temple as part of like the Guru episode, which we're going to actually be reviewing on the next podcast. So I'm kind of thinking, are they going to have Yang Chen be involved with or maybe replace the Guru as part of the whole chakra thing? That could be one way to do it. You could have Yang Chen give the Avatar State explanation early on in the season. That's potentially an option. Otherwise, it's a bit of a awkward situation. Like, do they do Escape from the Spirit World just to adapt that here because it's kind of important content at the end? I'd be a little bit surprised if stretched for time, but I think they have options with Yang Chen. I don't think we're going to do any like the Rift, bringing the Rift stuff forward, Old Iron. That just feels it's getting too into the weeds. Maybe a reference to it if you're just wanting to be like flavorful. The other ones though, so Lowen Lee, Ursa. It's just those two actually. So Lowen Lee, I think is fine. It's just interesting, I guess, that they're doing it. So same actor to play both of them makes sense. And then notably, we have our Ursa. So that's obviously for the Zuko Alone flashback, which, based on season 1, I think that's probably something that's going to get the attention it needs and probably will be done quite well. It's probably just more about will it be the whole book be consistently really, really well done. And also, I suppose, coming in with like Lowen Lee probably connected to the Azula story more than anything. Given that they already had the kind of weird already introduction to Azula May Tylee, but kind of not really. It'll be interesting to see how they go about like reintroducing her in that way. But any thoughts on Lowen Lee and Ursa coming in?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot you could do with Lowen Lee in terms of Azula and her character, and just, I don't know, maybe grounding her or just setting her, giving her some framework to work as a better framework for her to work as a character. So I think there's, something they can do with those characters. And yeah, for Ursa, I mean, getting, the backstory, the flashbacks, and that sort of information, I think is always very cool to sort of have and is needed for Zuko as a character to sort of understand him. So that makes sense.
Yep. But yeah, that's it for the Netflix Avatar news for now. I think there's been rumors in the meantime that like stuff like a Jin has been cast. And I think there's a few actors that we don't know who they're going to be playing that are connected to it. So there's still more announcements, I think, to come. But ultimately, I think after the reception from season 1, it's really all about, okay, when we get into the proper marketing, seeing characters in costume, getting confirmation, is it indeed just 8 episodes? I assume it's probably the same format. What are we doing here? Which episodes aren't we doing? What changes are they making? Is it the stuff that went wrong with the first season? Like, have they taken feedback on board? Because clearly there won't be any time to adapt to feedback after season 2. So they're only going to have the feedback from season adjust to, if they're even taking any of that stuff on board. But I suppose, where are you at kind of heading into what's probably going to be a somewhat rapid fire season 2 and 3 of the live action? After, season 1, we've discussed it on the podcast quite heavily. Where are you at on live action?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm still, in the middle of it. Like, I'll definitely watch it and see how it sort of turns out, but it's definitely not something that I'm like, holding up, super high or anything like that. But I think, if they do take the feedback either from, what fans have said or just from their own sort of, metrics of how the show did overall on Netflix, which, I'm sure they have them and they can sort of read into them, at least a bit sort of different than what we sort of had before. But yeah, I think, many people are sort of waiting on sort of, how the story is actually going to flow. Like you're saying, the amount of episodes, I think that's a key thing. I think many people haven't really had an issue with the actors or actresses in the show overall, or even, generally the look of the show. I think, they've done a pretty good job on presenting it in a, convincing way, giving their sort of budget and stuff like that. So I think that's not really sort of the issue as we see here. I think, there will be some bigger set pieces in, season 2, season 3. So I'm definitely curious to see sort of how they adapt those sort of like bigger moments, sort of what they include, what they don't sort of include, considering, they can't do everything, and I'm sure they won't have sort of like as many people as we've seen in the show and stuff like that, but it'll be cool to see how they all translate. I think they've done generally a pretty good job when they have had the sort of time and the budget, sort of to show a bunch of people on the screen at one time has been pretty good.
Yeah, like I have relative confidence that, like, say, The Blind Bandit, they're going to do that well. They're probably going to do Zuko alone. Well, depending on how exactly they go about doing. Maybe those two are combined into one episode, given the extra time that they have in live action. I think they're going to do the Bossing Say arc once they get there reasonably well. I just don't have a clue what they're going to do for the rest of the season, because how much of the kind of gap stuff basically between Toph joining and, arriving at Bossing Say are they going to do? Like, do they have time to go to the library, into the desert, and then make our way to Bossing Say, while also doing the stuff that happens before the Blind Bandit as well? Because there's like a time skip that they're going to have to somewhat explain in between seasons, because again, Aang doesn't know waterbending yet, so how much is going to happen off screen? Which of the early episodes are they doing, given that like they've already done like the Cave of Two Lovers already? That's out of the way, but there's a bunch of other stuff that is in the same position. So, and they're going to be the key decisions, in the same way that like all the episode cuts, character cuts from season 1 some of them were controversial, some more than others, that whole idea. But yeah, we'll see how it goes when we get more clear information on this. There is a Netflix event happening next week. Avatar's not listed as there being anything, so it's not one I'd be like, hey, watch it. It's like, wait and see if something happens, I guess. I think the fact that they almost did this announcement beforehand probably says they don't have anything, but we'll see. So yeah, that has been the news. Otherwise, we are just waiting to see what they do for like San Diego Comic-Con. We are sort of in the build-up to City of Echoes as the next kind of piece of content, but we wouldn't be expecting previews until probably next month. The first early review came out. There wasn't much to it, but it seems positive. So there is content coming out. It's just a little bit more waiting to. But from there, we will jump into our reviews for this episode. So we're doing 2 today. Again, we don't always do 3 per episode. The way I have it organized is that it's either 2 or 3, depending on the episodes. This time we're doing 1 Korra, 1 Avatar, and we're going to start with the Korra episode, and that is K305 The Metal Clan. So this is probably my favorite arc in Book 2, just this 2-part kind of Metal Clan arc here. I get we're in Zaofu for a little bit longer than that, but these 2 episodes together is, to me, Book 3 at its best. Is that a lot of these more side plotty kind of style moments, I think, work kind of the best, because it feels like we maybe don't get a chance to do as much of this stuff in a lot of the other seasons because they're so plot focused. But early Book 3 is a little bit more open while things come together, and it allows us to have that 2-part kind of Earth Queen arc, have this 2-part Zaofu arc with Lin and Su Yin. This one is obviously more of the introduction to this kind of crazy new location, Zaofu, meeting Su Yin and her whole clan of a family here, because it's a big family, and setting up the stage for the next episode. But it's still filled with, I think, lots of nice character moments of Opal is the airbender of note for this episode. We have the Bolin kind of romance that kind of starts here. The Lin Su Yin drama, some Toph backstory begins to come out. I just think start to finish, this one is packed with a lot of interesting kind of character dynamics that I just really, really, really like. And given that, as we'll get forward into more and more episodes, the core Red Lotus plot, when it gets going, is not my favorite, because I don't think it gets the time it needs. Stuff like this getting the time it does need is where Book 3 really shines for me. But what are your thoughts on the Metal Clan overall?
Yeah, no, I think, it's definitely a ramp up in this, book, and 10 is sort of just goes full stop with the action. But yeah, I think this episode specifically, I think, getting a new location, I think, is always a cool thing to see. And that's something that we don't really get too much of in Korra, since, it is very sort of focused on sort of whatever the issue is of the season. So to get to see a new location, and it being based off of a development of a element that we sort of was really cool in the last sort of show, I think it makes it all the more sort of interesting when you actually get to see it here, and the fact that it's all based around a city makes it even more interesting. And there's a lot of, like you're saying, there's a lot of character stuff here that is really sort of intriguing, and you get to learn, different personalities and stuff like that. I think whenever you can meet a bunch of characters, it's also very cool to sort of see that here. And there's a lot that's sort of underneath the surface in the city as well that we don't even really sort of grasp right in this sort of first episode. So there's a lot going on here, and I think that definitely makes it really cool. And even it being based off Toph and her character, I think is cool. Any harken back to sort of the original characters also gets sort of a +1 for many fans as well.
So with this one, it's so kind of character focused. I think we're just going to have to go through it like roughly scene by scene. The report here is that there is a new airbender in a place called Zaofu. We immediately hear it is the home of the Metal Clan, but most of them don't really know the details on what exactly this means. Like they haven't really been there. We see that Lin randomly is very apprehensive about going there. Really trying to get Korra to not go, but Korra wants to find the airbenders. That's why they're here in the first place. So Lin is going to stay back with Naga and the other animals on the ship, and she demands as they kind of head in that they don't say that she's here. And this is where we are introduced to Ai Wei, who greets them, brings them into the city, with the notable scene being he does ask, is there anyone else with you? Korra says no, and we find out that, of course, he is a truth seer and was aware that this was, in fact, a lie. So the opening sequence here is pretty cool here, because we do get the big intro shot to Zaofu with the crazy kind of metal structures that are kind of beautiful in the way they're designed. Like, it's not just like it's a modern city because they're metal benders. Because they're metal benders allows them to do crazy stuff with the metal, and so it's one of the most unique looking cities, and it's different. It's almost like a completely different nation within the Earth Kingdom once again, because metal is so different than Earth typically, and so it's so cool. It's like the introduction to Ba Sing Se all over again, but now with metal. But yes, the big thing is definitely what's going on with Lin and Zaofu, and we'll get that explanation shortly. But your thoughts on the opening couple of scenes?
Yeah, no, I think getting into this location is amazing. I mean, Bolin has sort of like the same reaction when he got the Ba Sing Se, right? So there's that sort of comparison 1-to-1, and this is just even a more sort of, like you're saying, a unique city, a unique location, because they have sort of this element and they can do, basically whatever they want with it. And, almost everyone in this, place has, the capacity to some degree to metal bend. So I think that definitely, makes it sort of stand out. I think, seeing Lynn sort of up in arms about this, considering that she is a metal bender, I think, that obviously sort of, warning flags up there that there's something going on there. And, even our core group here can see that there's something going on. I thought this was a really good way to sort of show the intro. Even before they get to the city, we just sort of are good on sort of like establishing that we're in sort of a different region. Like, there's not as much earth. It's definitely more sort of lush. I think that's just a really cool way to sort of set up the scene here.
I suppose that there is a quick cutaway to Air Temple Island. I suppose while we're here, let's do this kind of smaller part of the episode. So this is the Air Temple Island / Zahir part of the episode. So Zahir infiltrates Air Temple Island alongside some of the other new airbenders, because there's a lot of new faces arriving to the various air places. He's able to kind of immediately blend in. But we see that he does immediately kind of show off, kind of stand out. We get the new airbenders running the air gates. Most of them struggle, except Zahir, who goes through quite impressively, but kind of notably in a different way than, I think, say, like Janora when she originally demonstrated it. It's a mix of like aggressive acrobatics with like a little bit of classical airbending. But Milo is impressed, of course. Kaya begins to, side-eye Zahir a little bit. He's obviously given a different name, of course, and they don't have all the information on this. Then Kaya reveals to the group that they're going to be heading for the Northern Air Temple. Zahir asks, will the Avatar be there? And Kaya says no, and he's quite disappointed, like to a notable degree, about the Avatar not being there. So Kaya's suspicions beginning to grow. We'll get into the next kind of more important scene in just a second, but what are your thoughts on the start of this Zahir with the Airbenders?
Yeah, I mean, Zahir, he's, interesting character. There's obviously more that we wish we sort of knew about him, but, I think his infiltration, which, I mean, I guess is infiltrating, but it's not really that sort of like, not that sort of so involved. It's just, there's tons of new airbenders, so of course he's able to sort of join there. I mean, he does stand out because he has sort of like his own outfit. He wasn't sort of like directly sort of recruited or anything like that. So it definitely sort of makes him sort of stand out automatically just from the beginning here. And skills definitely become, very sort of apparent. I don't know. It makes you wonder if he should have like, hit that a bit better or anything like that. But I don't know. It's cool. It's interesting to see him interact with them and just sort of have, this sort of pre-existing knowledge that we'll get into more about. But yeah, he definitely sort of raises some eyebrows sort of immediately there, which, I think maybe he could have done a better job with if he really thought about it.
The final scene here is that Zahir goes into like Tenzin's office and picks up this Lahima kind of locket artifact, and he reads the poem that's on it. Let go your earthly tether, enter the void, empty and become wind. Iki comes in at this point. He kind of explains this to her. Kaya then arrives to see this somewhat kind of creepy scene kind of happening here, because like they keep Zahir's face, especially like in the shadows with the way they light the entrance to the room. So Kaya's a bit like, what are you doing up this late? She's suspicious of him. She kind of talks it out, and then in her head figures it out and is like, Zahir, big fight erupts here. Kaya gets to be pretty impressive here, kind of fighting, holding off Zahir. She calls out for help, of course, as they make their way outside. Zahir does win the fight against Kaya and the guards, but they kind of roughly forced Zahir to retreat, but ultimately he got what he wanted, which was, I guess, the Lahima poem he potentially didn't really know that much about, and certain information about kind of Korra / the location of people that Korra is going to care about, of course, which will come into play more towards the kind of end of the season. It was mostly just an information gathering mission, which is why he went in solo. But yeah, very dynamic fight scene here. One of Kaya's best, where you really do see that, like, oh yeah, there's elements of like Katara's style in Kaya, and she, they portray her as being skilled, but not quite at the absolute high level that certain other characters are at. But pretty nice showing still. What are your thoughts on this key scene on this side of the plot?
Yeah, I mean, I think this overall is, good job on sort of like establishing sort of Zahir as sort of a threat here, and as someone who actually sort of knows, things and knows what he's talking about. He knows about airbenders, he knows about the culture, and that sort of, comes into play later on in the season. So it's good to see that it's established here in the beginning. And, this fight scene, which isn't that long really, but it does a good way of sort of showing that, he's not sort of like super invincible, but he does have, really good sort of skill set at a base level. And with having airbending, obviously that sort of has enhanced what he could do previously. He seems to be able to use the staff pretty well here, even if it isn't in sort of the more sort of traditional way of doing things. But he's able to sort of, last minute dodge from Kaya's attacks here. But she does seem really good. Like, I think that it was generally a good showing for her in this battle. But I think like most times, whenever we see people sort of face airbending, they sort of, don't necessarily have like, the one up in order to sort of to balance the scales here, which I don't know, maybe you would think Kaya would have a better sort of skill set because she grew up with Tenzin, but considering their age differences and how we know Tenzin sort of was sort of focused on in their family, maybe that's not sort of the case there. But regardless, it's a cool showing and a cool sort of end battle here for Zahir and Kaya.
Back on the other side of the plot, as we kind of still make our way more towards the kind of main places in Zaofu, Ai explains kind of the philosophy of Zaofu, that like everyone is encouraged to reach their highest potential, and so it is really viewed as this like super super modern city, but also this city that, you know, it's still maybe small enough that you're able to have that sort of influence where like everyone here follows a specific kind of like philosophy of just like personal growth, and that is kind of shown here. Bolin asks about Toph, like, is she here? Because they see a statue of her on the side. Iway explains that no, she visited often in the past, but she left a few years ago to wander the world in search of enlightenment, which, given that, like, this is basically our first, like, proper information, really, on Toph, is like, whoa, that does not sound like the Toph we know. And especially with what we're going to find out in like just a second with the rest of kind of Toph's love life, I guess. We do get some pretty big reveals and kind of surprising reveals about like, whoa, Toph had a kind of crazy life to a certain degree. Like she is not the character you immediately think will go down the Hugh path of like wanting enlightenment under the banyan tree, as we kind of find out. But given kind of what happened, I suppose, earlier in her life, it maybe makes sense that she doesn't like the chaos of the kind of hustle and bustle of city life, so stays away from Republic City afterwards, and also this place. But still, some very interesting kind of like early info on Toph. But what are your thoughts on this details that we get?
Yeah, I mean, I think, initially that it was sort of surprising to see sort of where they say Toph is actually at, and how she, initially has some involvement in the city, but not really to any sort of degree. And she's sort of out on her own now, which I think it sort of fits her when we sort of, see her later on, but it definitely, seems a bit sort of out of place. But no, I think they do a good job of that overall. But the idea of the city and its sort of, goals, and its sort of, positive reinforcement and all those sort of things, I think it's definitely, really cool to sort of see. It definitely feels like sort of like your metal sort of like utopia almost, in this sort of, close knit community. So I think, they do a good job of that. And, it definitely feels like it is, like you're saying, it's small enough where that sort of involvement can actually sort of, potentially sort of actually happen. They're sort of, isolated from the rest of the Earth Kingdom, so they could, have this without having too many sort of issues. It sort of feels like sort of, the other sort of cities that we've seen in the original Avatar time that were sort of, not directly sort of linked with Bai Sensei. They have, some ability to have some sort of their own sort of, control over their own sort of, systems and stuff like that. So definitely, you can see why, some people would say that, they have a better way of doing things, even though we see later on that maybe it's not exactly perfect. But no, the initial sort of getting to see the city and understanding it, definitely sort of cool.
Mm-hmm. So we then meet the airbender we're looking for, his mother, who is initially just introduced as just Su Yin. She's finishing up a metal bending kind of art dancing performance. And cool. Fun fact, we also see Kuvira is part of this in the background here, in this interesting book 3 appearance, where she very early on is a really minor background character. She then becomes more of a present minor character in later episodes, but just cool to see the little bits of setup that we in no way could have predicted. Yep, that's our book 4 villain right there, dancing with Su Yin. But yeah, she immediately reveals that, hey, why'd you lie about this not being the full group? Aiwei has truth seeing, of course, which is the Toph ability. And this is where Korra is forced to admit that, yeah, Lin is here, the chief of police. And this is where we get the reveal that Lin and Su Yin are sisters. So we didn't know about this like at all before. But that maybe isn't surprising given Lin's personality and just the way she is about a lot of things, and clearly there's something personal about her family that she really doesn't want to talk about. So in particular, this kind of makes a lot of sense. But what are your thoughts on the introduction to Su Yin?
Yeah, no, I think the initial sort of introduction here was done pretty well, as far as sort of the matriarch of the city here, and sort of her involvement here and her many different things that she's, participates in. No, I think that that works out pretty well. And, getting the information about her and Lynn being related, I think is, cool as well as, not necessarily something that we would have, initially sort of thought that Lynn would have sort of a sister, but considering Lynn is sort of so, isolated and, doesn't really want to get people to know her and stuff like that, maybe it's not too surprising that she has, relatives out there. But no, I think this was a cool way to sort of give us this sort of like information dump that even our characters are quite surprised about.
This is when we go back to the ship and confront Lynn about this. Lynn, once again, does not want to say anything about this. We get the reveal that the sisters have not spoken in 30 years. Lynn says that apparently Su Yin tore the family apart. And then Su Yin says that Lynn seems set to keep it that way. So immediately an argument about something that happened in the past. What's going on here? We do also get the reveal here that they're kind of half sisters. So it's same mother, different fathers. So that's like crazy to the point where like we still don't know the full details there. We know who, I say we know. We got the reveal of like the identity of Lynn's father, this random character named Kanto. But we still to this day do not know who Su Yin's father is. So that remains a ongoing mystery. But still some big reveals in this scene here. But yeah, Su Yin's daughter is the new airbender. We get the detail at the end here. But what are your thoughts on the two sisters kind of meeting for the first time in 30 years, basically?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, immediately puts you on edge that there's something going on in their family. And even though, one seems to be running this city that seemingly is, almost perfect, the other one is sort of ran away from sort of having any sort of interaction with this, which is pretty big sort of thing considering, how, I guess you could say, important Su Yin actually is. So yeah, that's definitely surprising to see in itself, and the fact that they're, related and half sisters, that also is interesting getting that sort of information about Tough as well, which I know, people were really sort of curious about. And yeah, like you're saying, we still don't know the sort of full details to that, which, maybe we would never really need to know. It's just a fun tidbit to sort of consider, Toph having this sort of interesting life, sort of growing up.
This is when we are introduced to the Su Yin's children. So we first get to meet Wei and Wing, the twins. They are her youngest, and we see that they're both playing, a metal bending kind of sport that they kind of made up. So they seem kind of very combat, kind of sports, athletic focused. Then we meet her other son, Huan, who is really into metal sculptures and art and seems completely different than his twin brothers there. He seems like a bit of an odd character. Then we get to meet Opal, of course, who is the new airbender because of harmonic convergence. Immediately, Bolin and her have a little bit of a kind of a romantic kind of spark. She seems to like him immediately, and he seems to just naturally kind of turn on the charm a little bit here. Then we have Opal and Lynn meeting for the first time. So it's her first time meeting Lynn. That's interesting. Lynn, very, very standoffish about kind of all things the family, basically. Su Yin wants Opal trained in Zaofu, but Lynn especially wants, to take her immediately to one of the air temples, just for security reasons because of people hunting down Korra. But of course, this is a safe city, apparently, best security in the world. You kind of believe it based on the reputation so far, but that's the situation there. So they kind of settle on the idea, while they discuss this, Korra is going to start to train Opal now, and they'll see where exactly it's going to take place into the future. But you do see a little bit of Su Yin being maybe quite overprotective of her children, especially Opal. But what are your thoughts on getting to meet some of the children here?
And I mean, I thought this was always cool just to see how big her sort of family is and their, varying personalities, how they're all sort of unique and sort of stand out. I mean, we don't, over the course of the season, we don't get, super amount of information about all of them, but, they do have their own sort of distinct, personalities, their likes and things that they're into. So no, I thought that was really cool. I mean, that we learn later on that that's, been a focus of Su Yin. So to get to see all her kids and sort of what they're sort of into, I think, it stands out as far as, meeting these new characters here and to see how they interact with our original gang here, Bolin and Opal, I think is cool. And seeing, Lynn and sort of her just sort of blasé sort of attitude about everything, it's definitely sort of stands out here, especially considering Opal really is sort of, interested in meeting her. So it's, Lynn hasn't been around for 30 years, so none of these sort of, kids, her nephews and nieces, she's really had any interaction with. So that's something to see just for the first time here.
Mm-hmm. So then we get the training scene. So Korra immediately starts to train Opal. They do the really cool airbender kind of circle walking thing where they kind of like point their kind of hands at each other and start to walk in a circle. And so kind of Korra generates a kind of small vortex. Opal kind of helps to kind of build that up. And they create this kind of gentle kind of small tornado kind of flowing breeze as they kind of walk around. And Korra thinks that Opal is a natural, as well as just the idea that Opal seems to really like this idea that she is an airbender, finally getting to train with it to some degree. She doesn't seem maybe super confident in her skills, but is being praised here. So we do see as we kind of go forward that she is going to be one of the best of the kind of new recruits along with Kai. So it's kind of cool that like she gets introduced like just a few episodes after him, and in the future they'll be kind of like paired up as on missions for the kind of new air nomads. So it's a very cool scene. It's a kind of like this beautiful scene of the animation just of them kind of slowly walking around as they face each other. But what are your thoughts on this quick training scene?
No, I thought this scene was always really cool. Even watching it back again, I think it does a really good job of establishing sort of, Korra and her sort of, never being a trainer, but now she's able to sort of, teach a little bit of her skills on here, passing that on. And Opal here, definitely feels like she's a natural here. And like you said, we later on get to see that she is, basically one of the best of the new, sort of airbenders here. And it definitely sort of seems like it meshes really well with her personality, which, makes her stand out from all her other sort of siblings. So it seems like this was almost like it was like meant to be that she was to get sort of airbending and not have sort of any sort of earthbending skill or sort of talent or anything along those sort of lines. So I thought that was a really good way to sort of establish her character and her sort of bending here. Definitely just feels like she's really meant to be in this role.
Mm-hmm. We cut to a kind of dinner scene where we really quickly see Batar and Batar Senior kind of show up. So her kind of oldest son and her husband briefly show up. They're working on something in the background. We see Opal and Bolin talking here, continuing to kind of get on. They have good chemistry. He talks about initially growing up on the streets as a contrast to her being from like the family that made this place, but then his life and his adventures going through the whole spiel about like pro-bending star, mover star, working with the Avatar, and she's amazed at just how crazy it is compared to what she feels is probably an overly protected, secluded life in Zaofu, where her mother is being a little bit overbearing about you have to train here, stay with the family type thing. And the idea coming out of this is just that she feels, I suppose, a little bit limited in Zaofu about all of this stuff. So I do like this general character trait. It's simple, but I think effective for her of just, it's like airbending related. She wants to be free to pursue her bending in like the right way. And Sue, as someone who's also about that, needs to kind of let her, as we'll kind of see, especially in like the next episode. So I definitely like this, and I actually like the Opal Bolin chemistry as well, that they've avoided so far this book the romance being in the drama direction, and I think they handle it quite well overall. But what are your thoughts here, Opal and Bolin talking?
Yeah, I thought this, like you're saying, it was very good sort of down the earth sort of conversation here with Bolin sort of, listing all of his exploits, which, definitely seems like is sort of like out there and what he's sort of done. But, it's had a lot of ups and downs, but you definitely can sort of understand sort of Opal's point of view of, her being sort of only living in this sort of, secluded, isolated sort of city that, despite all of his positives is sort of, on its own here. There's not really much else, sort of out there in terms of what you want to do. So again, it just feels like her sort of becoming an airbender fits her new personality, her real personality of wanting to be sort of out there and doing things, involved with things. And I don't know, it's interesting considering, what we eventually learn about Su Yin and sort of her backstory and her sort of history. It's interesting that she sort of went this complete sort of opposite with her kids, or at least initially. But it's like anything else, you sort of have to grow into that with your kids and stuff like that. But yeah, I like this sort of conversation. It definitely feels like they mesh really well together. I think that's something that, the show did really well with their characters.
Next, we get Sue and Korra talking kind of one-on-one. We see that Sue also heavily dislikes the Earth Queen and also thinks that the idea of a queen for the Earth Kingdom is outdated, full stop. Korra hasn't really considered this idea that, like, oh, we should change just the leadership of a whole nation. Is that a thing? Sue says you should consider it. Lin keeps jabbing Sue about having these kind of strong opinions, clearly referencing the past, but being unwilling to really expand or explore it ultimately. So we kind of continue that sort of trend. Then, out of nowhere, I almost forgot how sudden this happens. Varric just shows up. He just walks into the room. Julie is also there. He's been here for a while. Sue has taken him in. He's helping with like tech projects in Zaofu. Then we get the obvious reaction of like Lin as like a police officer being like, well, everyone thinking you should be in jail, right? Sue talks about second chances and how he's deserving of one as well. Everyone is, while being a little bit maybe dismissive of mistakes made in the past. While Lin, of course, really emphasizes the idea that you can't really let those past issues go. And the idea is that they're both quite strong on either side of this, and some nuance is needed. They clearly need to talk about things, but it's not quite happening just yet. But there's some interesting stuff definitely going on here when it comes to second chances. Sue got a second chance about something. Lin is frustrated about that, and Sue's very willing to give other people many second chances, but not maybe as focused on what the mistake was in the first place. But yeah, some key points here, because even though I don't think they explore it super well, the book, I think, is maybe trying to have Korra think about what a good leader is, given that she, as an avatar, is a kind of world leader. They don't really have Korra consider it like all that much, ultimately, especially because the Earth Queen is such an extreme example where everyone dislikes her, basically. So they do kind of leave the proper discussion of this for the Red Lotus, which, interestingly, going back to some of our original coverage of this, if I remember correctly, I think this is where Kelly's suspicion of Su Yin started as being potentially another Red Lotus character here. Just because it does actually line up pretty well once you find out what the Red Lotus are about. But actually, Su Yin is more of just, I suppose, wanting more of an effective leader position rather than, just a queen just by default type thing. So there's that. But yeah, what are your thoughts on these scenes here? The Sue and Korra talk, and then Varric appearing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the talk is important. I think it definitely feels like it's something that Korra, should consider, her role in sort of world sort of politics, right? Like, I mean, she's new to Avatar. She's also, lived sort of up until recently a kind of a sheltered life as well. So her sort of, interacting with these people and sort of, seeing how the world works on the grander scale is a first for her, but she's, having to learn very fast, unfortunately, and, having to deal with different sort of personalities and stuff like that. So it's definitely something that, she has to consider. And there's definitely more they could have done, overall in the show considering this. But we do get to see a little bit more, especially, when we get back to sort of Republic City and things like that. And even later on, there's a bit more of that as well. But it's definitely something to consider how how it plays into just the role of world leaders and, the Red Lotus and their, what they're sort of aiming for, despite sort of how it turns out and how it seems to have been, a bit sort of twisted in this sort of endeavor, which I don't think Suyin, ever necessarily wanted to go that far, even considering, what happens with Kavir and everything like that. There's a line I think that Suyin does have. It just seems that that's way past where Lin wants it to be, which is why when we see Varric, it definitely feels like a very sort of like a slap in the face, to just sort of have him there, considering everything that he's sort of done before. And all of our characters are sort of, understandably upset at seeing him again, considering what he's done to the company and Mako and Bolin and everything like that. I mean, I guess Bolin sort of got the best out of everything in the end a little bit, but even he didn't leave sort of unscathed with, Varric's sort of antics and stuff like that. So to see Varric here is a bit sort of funny. I don't know, he's a character that always sort of like, steals the show whenever he's in sort of the scene or anything like that. So it's fun to see him. He is a funny sort of character, and he does get a bit of progression too later on. So it's good to see that eventually something does become of his character as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's also important to highlight that the concept of the Queen being an outdated notion is something the series kind of commits to later on, mainly with the comics, like Runes of the Empire. We're building up to the idea of that the Earth Kingdom should have an elected kind of official in each state rather than just an overall Earth King or Queen. And we're moving towards that. The whole point of that comic was about it's a really sudden shift for such a giant nation is maybe a bit of a stretch to do really, really suddenly, but they are building in that direction to get there. So it's just an interesting one to consider that Sue's kind of correct here. And I suppose the fact that her nation works kind of so well by itself, she seems to have the right way of things kind of ultimately there. Then we get some interesting kind of brother talk in the bathroom here. Mako noting that Bolin and Opal seem to be getting on quite well. Interestingly, Bolin says that he feels Opal might not be his type, which Mako immediately responds with, like, what do you... Okay, if your type is, like, princesses and, like, basically referring to, like, Ginger and Eska, basically. And then it does actually make Bolin go, like, oh, actually, you're right. Maybe someone who is more normal, kind of down to earth and nice, rather than, like, odd and unique is actually the way to go. But his takeaway from this is almost that, like, oh, because I hadn't been maybe like actively pursuing a relationship, I'm now going to do that. But what was making it work was just him being natural in the first place, which we'll immediately kind of like get to in just a second. But what are your thoughts on this Mako and Bolin's talk here?
Yeah, no, I thought this was really just a nice little short bit conversation between the two of them. Just the brothers sort of interacting with each other. I think, sometimes we don't sort of get enough of that, or there's always like some major problem and, Mako's sort of taking the lead here. But no, I think this is a good sort of back and forth with them and actually getting sort of, Bolin to sort of realize things, even if he does take it a little bit too far at first, which I think is, that's sort of on par for Bolin's sort of character here. But no, I thought this was really nice.
Mm-hmm. Then we have another Suyin and Korra talk. This is where Korra asks, what's up between you and Lin? So Suyin says that they didn't have a normal childhood, neither of them knew their fathers, and Toph was very busy as the chief of police. Toph's strict upbringing led to her giving her own children a lot of freedom. The two sisters fought a lot. Lin went down the road of being a cop, following in Toph's footsteps. Sue was more of a rebel. This is where obviously they don't cover the important bit kind of in between this. But at 16, she left to explore the world, sailed on a pirate ship, traveling circus, was part of a sandbender commune at some point, and we see all these pictures in the background. Then going on to create Zaofu, marrying Batar, who was the architect, I guess, of a lot of the early buildings of Zaofu, and then having her family, which Korra points out is perfect, but Suyin says, except she does wish Lin was part of it. Like, I suppose Lin and Toph, that there was a bit more of a connection there with everything, because overall it is pretty ideal overall. So this speech from Suyin is pretty cool, because it is like more or less kind of her full backstory here. In addition to what's in the next episode, of course. So there's some cool stuff here. There's been so much speculation about this in terms of like, okay, sailed on a pirate ship. We got the detail earlier on that like her head chef is a former pirate, so that explains that a bit. Traveling circus, I think this is part of maybe the Zahir theory, is that was Zahir part of that circus as well. It's not really a thing. And then the sandbender commune thing is interesting, because I don't think we ever see Suyin do any sandbending, but the implication would be that that is part of her skill set, given that she lived with sandbenders for a certain amount of time. Maybe just a forgotten detail about Sue there. But what are your thoughts on this speech explaining, I suppose, the formation of Zaofu and more backstory?
Yeah, no, I thought this was cool. I mean, she seems like a really sort of interesting character to have, sort of gone through, a whole bunch of different things. Like she was able to sort of go on her sort of like journey of, essentially like self-discovery, and sort of figure out things for herself. Now, of course, the reason for her going on that, there's other reasons behind that she doesn't necessarily tell us, but it's interesting just sort of her sort of explaining this to Korra, and Korra's always sort of wanted to sort of get out there and do things, right? So it's sort of it's nice for Korra to sort of, I guess, sort of hear this story about a character who went on this sort of journey and was able to sort of figure out what they want and have almost sort of like a perfect life at this point, other than sort of Lin. That's the one sort of like sore spot here, but I think it really takes to heart, Korra, sort of wanting to sort of, figure out how she can sort of fix this, especially her just being her natural sort of character, and I guess just part of her being the Avatar, wanting to figure out how to sort of deal with this sort of issue here, and it's sort of like something that she thinks she can do.
Mm-hmm. Next, we go to Bolin, now actively trying to flirt with Opal, but it comes across a little overdone and a bit creepy, and she's a little bit turned off. He immediately realizes this and is like, oh, sorry, I got really nervous because I know you like me. She's like, how do you know that? And they actually end up having this very kind of like honest conversation where effectively they both just kind of openly admit that they do kind of like each other, but that she likes it when he just acts normally, naturally, like he had been up to now. And so I think in maybe previous seasons, this might have been a multi-scene type thing of Bolin messing up scene after scene. It's the new approach of just, hey, let's immediately stop this and just have them be in a good relationship where they can communicate well. So I've always liked this kind of aspect of this relationship, is that these two always are mostly able to kind of talk quite openly with each other, despite there being some ups and downs along the way. But your thoughts on this scene?
Yeah, no, this was a really great way of them, coming to terms with this, new, beginning relationship here. Bolin typically can sort of take things a little bit sort of too far, but they, like you're saying, they nip that pretty quickly here. And I think that they do have a good way of sort of communicating with each other, even though there are sort of some issues later on, but that's, pretty realistic of any sort of relationship. So I think they do, a good job of that. I don't know if this is sort of them figuring out how to do relationships better based off of ones they did before, that they sort of upped it up a little bit too much. But no, I think this is a really good start.
Mm-hmm. And the final scene then is Korra brings Opal to talk to Lin. Opal is so nice and tries to say this in the best kind of way possible. So being so excited to meet Lin after all this time. She's sad when it seems like Lin was just not interested in getting to know her. She wants Lin to be part of their family. Lin just tells her to get out really aggressively. Opal cries and leaves. This is where Korra then calls Lin out in a really kind of scathing assessment of Lin at this point in time, saying that, like, you won't change, you'll always be a bitter, lonely woman. And we end actually with Lin starting to cry. So the first, like, non-angry, annoyed show of emotion from Lin at the end of the episode here. But clearly the sense, and we maybe have to go back to maybe some of the other scenes and highlight, because we'll get this maybe explained in the next episode, the kind of sound effect that they use in some of Lin's scenes where it seems like she's about to go into a flashback. They have that kind of flashback sound effect, but it cuts off. That Lin refuses to do that at multiple times, and so is kind of stuck like this. And we'll see, of course, the journey she goes on in the next episode. But for now, the first real show of emotion properly from Lin here, as she's just very, very rude to Opal, who's like the nicest character ever, basically. So it's a pretty intense scene here. But what are your thoughts on how the episode ends here?
Yeah, I think, getting to see the real emotion from Lin being affected by this, very short sort of conversation here, it definitely comes across that there's a lot that sort of Lin needs to sort of work on, and that, it seems like she realizes it herself that there's, more, sort of emotional underlining of things with her family that eventually she might need to actually sort of deal with. And, I think that they do a really good job overall, in the next episodes, showing her progression as sort of a character here. And, I think it's interesting, when we have sort of the super tough, BA type character, to see them actually have any sort of real emotion and actually have, real sort of character growth. I think if you can do it well, it can come across as a really sort of strong point in the show or the season. And I think they do a good job with her. And, Korra, isn't one to sort of mince words. She, comes out and sort of says what's sort of happening here. But I think, for Lin as her sort of character also being very tough, that's something that she needed to hear. So I thought that was really, interesting the way that they broke that down.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, that is the episode. Of course, this is a bit of a two-parter with the next one, which we'll do next time out, where they get into the flashback. We actually do get flashback content, giving more context to what's happening here. But yes, very, very successful episode. That moves us into our Avatar episode for this time out. That's 218, The Earth King. So we're getting towards the end of book 2 here. And this is like the last kind of calm before the storm, but there's still some action in this one, of course. It's a very interesting episode here, where it's properly the introduction of the Earth King, convincing him, kind of getting the details of the conspiracy out, how we actually convince King Kwei of this, while Zuko is sick from a mysterious illness because he made the right decision, as we will get into here. I think there's definitely better book 2 episodes. There's no real, I would say, problem with this one. It's just, after how incredible so many of the episodes before this were, and after this one are, this one maybe just stands out as like, oh yeah, this is the kind of transition episode where we have to put things into position ahead of the finale. But it's still really good overall, because book 2 is in a super strong place at the for the whole second half. But yeah, interesting one. We'll get into it. But what are your overall thoughts on The Earth King?
Yeah, it's funny how it is, focused on sort of, transitioning sort of the main sort of plot, and, sort of we got Appa back and now we can actually sort of do things. I think a lot of the episode, is sort of recalled mainly for like, the big sort of action scene that, comes pretty much right at the beginning, and then it's sort of, chill-ish for the rest of the episode. I think it still does a good job of just sort of, doing more on sort of establishing the king and sort of how the Earth Kingdom is, supposedly run, and showing that even if, things are looking up, there is still this sort of underlining, unease of, sort of the war and how, how things are going to be affected with the Earth King. And especially when you get to the end of the episode and you get sort of that final reveal, I think it just shows that there's a lot more to happen in this sort of book here that, this episode is sort of bringing all together. So it does a really good job of, I guess, just bringing the pieces together that we thought were sort of, solved. Like we thought we had things figured out. We thought we had, what we're going to do for the rest of the book, but we see that there's still a lot more to come, which, this book overall just does a really good job of doing.
Mm-hmm. So with this one, let's actually cover the Zuko side of the episode, like in its entirety at the start, because rewatching this episode again, I often forget like that there's not that many scenes of Zuko in this episode, like because they wait until the finale to actually do a lot of the big, he has to make big choices kind of back and forth. This is more of just explaining the aftermath of his big decision. So yeah, he returns home, suddenly collapses to the ground. He's suddenly ill from some mystery illness. He dreams about being basically the Fire Lord, and there's two dragons, one on either shoulder, kind of pulling him in opposite directions. A blue dragon voiced by Azula telling him to go to sleep just like Mother. The red dragon voiced by Iroh telling him to get out and kind of wake up. As we see, he's kind of struggling. He's pained, kind of going through this kind of dream metamorphosis, as Iroh explains when he does actually wake up. The explanation we get is that Zuko's decision was so in conflict with his vision of himself that he's at war inside of himself, and he is going through a metamorphosis because of this. And when he comes out, he will be the beautiful prince he was always meant to be. And then we end with a very mysterious scene as Zuko kind of wakes up, looks in the mirror, and he looks at himself as like Aang, because he suddenly has no scar, he has the arrow tattoo, but it was just like a daydream kind of type thing. So yeah, it's some crazy, how your chi is affected by your decision stuff, which interestingly Lin is going to go through in the next episode, which is kind of funny on the chorus side of things. I like the setup for the influence of Azula versus the influence of Iroh here, which will be something that actually happens, not just in a dream, as we go into the final few episodes. But obviously, the idea is that he actually comes out of this weird happy Zuko, as we'll meet, I think, in the next episode. And it's only when Azula properly arrives to be the other dragon that we see the conflict kind of come back up for him again. But what are your thoughts on Zuko in this episode after his big choice to free Appa?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, seeing his sort of conflict and sort of tumultuous sort of like emotions here is really sort of, I don't know, it shows you something of his sort of character, that he had such a view of himself that it was able to sort of physically sort of make him ill, which, could just be part of just sort of this universe and how, how your body can be affected by, different things in your environment and stuff like that. But regardless, him as a character, he had such a strong view of himself that he, was able to sort of, just make himself sick. And Iroh sort of realizes this very sort of quickly. I guess, Iroh, maybe he's gone through something like this as well, and he's able to sort of, hopefully sort of, lead Zuko through this sort of, crisis that he's actually going through here. But no, I like the idea of, Zuko having conflicting dragons, sort of the motions, the good and the bad, in order of what he's going to do in the future going forward. And it is cool how this does get played out in sort of real world sort of effect when Azula is around here. But yeah, I think it's something cool to see how this actually plays out. And I like, him sort of waking up as like an older Aang, unblemished, and sort of an older Aang as well. I think that, I don't know if that's like the first time we've seen sort of like an older Aang sort of model of a character. Is something to note as well.
And I guess in reflection, it's maybe also meant to be a little bit of a tease ahead of the big kind of book 3 reveal that like he's actually related to an avatar, as well as, the evil line of Fire Lords. That might be why there's almost the random he wakes up as the avatar scene, that these are the two options, like he's either the Fire Lord or he's like the avatar. But interesting. On the other side of things, we get a whole scene here at the start that they actually spend some time on here, as the gang just has to decide what to do next. Do they think that, hey, things are going well, we'll try and convince the Earth King right now, and it should go well because we have Appa back, they don't have any blackmail kind of material over us, we'll just do it. Katara and Toph think it's not going to go so smoothly because Long Feng and the Dai Li are still out there. It's going to be a tough opportunity to convince the Earth King, especially because they roughly know he's a puppet, but they don't really know who he is as a person. So there's still that kind of mystery overall as well. They ultimately side with Aang, kind of makes the decision for them. They're going to try and reveal the truth to the Earth King, which leads to this very dynamic sequence where Team Avatar just attacks the palace, and they just absolutely bulldoze their way through all of the palace guards on the outside. It's just relentless. Like not a single step backwards is taken here, as they just go all out, highlighting how skilled they are. They're all above master level kind of benders here, up against characters who I assume are already kind of like top tier benders to be palace guards, and they're just absolutely throwing them out of the way. It's a really fun action set piece to just see the group just making progress to make it into the palace. But what are your thoughts on these opening scenes here, the discussion and then the crazy attack?
Yeah, the discussion is fun. It's, having them have, differing sort of opinions on sort of what to do going forward. It's cool to see our group sort of interact together in this sort of way, and not necessarily know exactly what they want to do or the best way to go about it. Positive Sokka maybe being brainwashed, maybe not, probably not, of course. But just sort of the mental attitudes that they sort of have here. It's cool to see them sort of in play, and them to sort of commit on a course of action here. And then, like you're saying, the big sort of action set piece is definitely, a fun one to actually see. I think it's one that people always mention in terms of like how strong our sort of characters are, especially at such a sort of young age here. I don't know if the palace guards are sort of as skilled as we might think them to be, but regardless, there's tons of them, so you would think they would be able to sort of overwhelm our sort of group here, but our sort of core bender group here are able to sort of come through this pretty quickly. I think it definitely helps that they have, different sort of abilities here, the air and the water. I think that's sort of, I don't know, whenever other benders sort of fight, sort of other elements, unless they're really sort of keyed into their sort of abilities, they always seem like sort of at like such a huge disadvantage. I think that's, probably why, like we've seen before, benders who do incorporate other elements from into their bending seem to be pretty strong, or at least above sort of the rest of the fodder of their own sort of element here. So I think that definitely sort of works here, especially when Katara is just sort of laying waste to people with the water bending and sort of keeping it in check here. So no, I think it's really cool. It's a nice sort of set piece here, and they definitely show their strength and their abilities all in one sort of go here. And it's right in the beginning of the episode too. So for an episode that is, like we said before, more sort of transitional, the fact that they put this effort into this sort of, one big scene is pretty cool. Maybe that's why there's not as much going on later on in the episode.
Mm-hmm. Then we get this whole, like the core of the episode is they finally get in there. They break down the door to the throne room, basically. We finally get to meet Earth King Kui properly, but of course Long Feng and the Dai Li are right there. Basically, they're just kind of like, hey, put down your weapons. They're about to be arrested. Long Feng's about to take over the situation again. Until he reveals that Aang is the Avatar, then the king is like, no, wait. I actually want to hear what he has to say. So Aang attempts to really quickly explain the whole conspiracy and the fact that there has been a war going on for 100 years. Kui, of course, is unable to believe this because he's not heard anything of this whatsoever. And it's basically this person he's met for the first time versus his most trusted advisor, basically. And it's a tough ask here. So how can we prove that Long Feng is lying about this and is involved in the conspiracy? Well, the first thing they go for is, you never met a sky bison. show us your mark. They they reveal that. They bring Appa in. They compare the tooth to the mark. Confirmation, he lied about that. He did mess with Appa before. So this gets a little bit of trust from the king, but he needs more proof. This is where we go to try and convince him using the Lake Laogai Daili headquarters. And there's a bunch of reveals that happen here. Like the king has never left the palace before, ever. So that's kind of crazy. But of course, the Daili headquarters isn't there anymore. So they settle on the only way to fully convince will be to use the drill as proof. As in, there's no possible way, even with all the Daili, they could get a giant thing like that away from the wall this quickly. That's the last opportunity. But the problem they have here is that it seems there are rules within the Earth Kingdom that no Earth King has ever been to the Outer Wall, which we'll probably have to discuss that in a second. But what are your thoughts on these early scenes here of Quay speaking for the first time, Long Feng trying to manipulate him, take control of the situation, and gradually them revealing some of the lies here?
Yeah, it definitely some effort, which, I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense that the king would sort of, believe, like you're saying, his most trusted advisor, like that's the person that, probably has been with him for, sort of his whole role as a king and even, before he was a king. So I don't know, you can see that there should have been, decent trust there, and, assuming that you have the right person in the position, they would be, worth their weight in gold and trustworthy and everything like that. But clearly, unfortunately, in this situation, that is not the case here. But I like that they're able to sort of, slowly whittle down to sort of gain some trust here, considering that they've never met the king. And, the king in this sort of, kingdom is very sort of isolated. He doesn't really, involve himself with the sort of day-to-day affairs of the people and sort of their worldly doings and going on, so stuff like that, which obviously, proves to be some problems later on, and that has to change overall, which I don't know, maybe that explains why the kingdom, sort of came to be what it came to be later on when we see it in chorus time and so forth. But yeah, at least at this time here, there's definitely a lot of things that King Quay has to sort of catch up with and sort of experience for the first time ever.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, the line I was talking about there, no Earth King has ever been to the Outer Wall. Now, is this actually the truth? Is this part of the conspiracy that, like, hey, don't check the wall, just so you're not involved out there? And it's weird because obviously we know stuff about other Earth Kings at this point, and that we basically know that, yes, other Earth Kings have definitely left the Earth Kingdom before. But it still could be true that no Earth King has ever, like, actively just been to the Outer Wall. They could have been in and around it, but just not on it. It's hard to know what to make of this line, but it's a pretty crazy thing to say, given that this is this, like, long-lasting kind of monarchy in the Earth Kingdom, and, like, no one's ever visited that Outer Wall once until Quay does it here. Any thoughts on this line here?
Yeah, I mean, with such an expansive city, it does feel like it's really, it'd be surprising considering how well they sort of expanded so far that they've never, that they've never ever been there. Like when the wall was closer, like when it was only the middle ring, or sort of the inner ring, like did that and sort of not count in terms of like reaching sort of the outer wall, or is this sort of like, the past, say like 100 generations or something like that, they've never reached the wall or anything like that. So I don't know. It seems weird considering we know the Earth Kingdom has sort of done some sort of like expansions and stuff like that, but did they always have like, the generals and stuff go out and explore the world, but never the actual king themselves? I mean, this king isn't very sort of bending focus or any sort of, combat or any sort of tactical sort of mind. Maybe that kind of makes sense. And, they have such a hierarchy of generals and sort of people in place here that maybe they never really, had the real need to sort of go out in any sort of like direct person sort of capacity. But I don't know. It's definitely something to sort of take note of, and this isn't sort of, I guess, sort of super unique. Like we have sort of seen this sort of in real world sort of capacity as well. So it's not sort of so far out there, but it definitely doesn't speak well of the city and how it's managed, which I think is pretty apparent when you see sort of the outer ring and sort of how dilapidated it actually sort of is. So King definitely probably should have been out there so that they could actually sort of experience that and sort of see how they can better the people. But monarchies and stuff like that sometimes don't always go the right sort of way as far as taking care of the people, which is unfortunate.
So yeah, they take Quay on Appa to the wall. They see that the drill is still right down there. It's kind of walled off, but it's still right there, stuck in the wall. And the truth is revealed because, of course, the drill has a giant Fire Nation logo on it, and there's no real way to explain this away. Quay lingers on the decision, but ultimately has Long Feng arrested by the Dai Li. But you see that the Dai Li, just before they make their decision, do look at each other, and it's clear that they're assessing what choice that they should make when it comes to this. They choose to play it cool by going along with the king here so they don't out themselves and cause an issue. But it's clear that they are going to remain loyal to Long Feng throughout this whole thing as he's taken away. This is where they then reveal to the king that, okay, the comet is coming, and with that you will have no chance, but there is the eclipse as our one chance to strike back. You need to make the decision right now. Are you going to help us on this day, or just basically defend and probably still get taken out in the end? Quay is worried, but he feels they have to do it, so he will agree with the attack, and that will be organized with the Council of Five. So they've accomplished what they kind of set out to do, like 8 episodes ago, what they found out in the library. So they've reported it here. They're going to have their counterattack against the Fire Nation on the day of Black Sun, and Long Feng has apparently been arrested, but it's suspicious. So what are your thoughts on this? Finally, some success here for Team.
Yeah, they definitely needed some sort of positive sort of, reaction to everything that they sort of have been trying here. And yeah, King Kuei sort of finally getting out to the wall to see sort of this huge metal monstrosity sort of, trying to attack the city. I think, that would be pretty shocking for anyone to see, especially the king who, has sort of the history or the understanding that the wall is sort of like almost nigh impenetrable, except for maybe Iroh, but, they don't try to sort of consider that any sort of real effect here. But yeah, just sort of seeing that definitely sort of sets the stage for the stakes, which I think is why King Kuei sort of makes his decision to sort of support this sort of cause here. Despite what actually happens in the end, he has the right idea of actually sort of trying to sort of help the world and end the war.
Mm-hmm. Next scene is General Hao of the Council of Five comes in and reveals this box of confiscated items in Long Feng's office. So basically everyone gets a letter of some sort. So Toph gets a letter from her mother wanting to finally talk things out, changed her mind on everything. Aang gets the scroll from Guru Patik, which we saw from before, and reveals that it is about helping Aang to control the Avatar state. So that's big. Katara and Sokka don't get a direct message, but they get a report about basically Hakoda's location, so they know where he is and can go to him if they need to. So the gang has to decide here what they're going to do. It looks like the only option is to split up, and they ultimately decide on this. Katara is going to stay with the Earth King, which will allow Sokka to go see their father. Toph will go meet with her mother. Aang will go to the Eastern Air Temple to meet with Guru Patik. So as they say their big goodbyes here, it seems like Aang is about to confess his love for Katara, but Sokka interrupts, of course. The king then reveals that Kyoshi warriors have arrived. So Sokka's like, yeah, we can trust them, let them in. But he can't stay to kind of meet them because he has to go. But we get the reveal kind of outside that it is Kyoshi warriors, but it's Azula, Mei, and Ty Lee dressed up as Kyoshi warriors because, of course, they defeated Suki and Ko a few episodes ago. So Ba Sing Se has been infiltrated here. So that's a pretty kind of crazy situation. And then, yeah, there's a few other really quick scenes. Long Feng sits in prison knowing the Dai Li are basically still on his side, and he's going to plan something at some point. And Toph arrives to her meeting to be captured immediately by Xinfu and Master Yu and trapped in a metal cell. So tons of crazy stuff happens here at the end as they're in full-on kind of two-part finale setup at this point as pieces are moved in the right positions. So really strong ending in my mind. I really like the letters as the way to give each character a different thing to do, and it makes a lot of sense that he would control that sort of information. And then, yeah, the big kind of twist of Azula entering Ba Sing Se through infiltration rather than the drill is pretty perfect and such a great kind of end note. But what are your thoughts on the kind of final sequence of this episode as we set up the finale?
Yeah, no, it's a great setup. I think having, each of our characters has a thing to sort of focus on, and a new sort of, issue in the city that people aren't even aware about. It really does sort of does a good job of setting the stage for future episodes and all the sort of continuing plot lines that are going to come. I think, Azula and that's a really good job of them actually doing like a infiltration of an area that, they didn't want people to know that they're there, and that they can sort of play on later on. And, having our group, unfortunately come to the conclusion that they're going to have to go their separate ways, which we know in stories never seems to turn out well, but something that you unfortunately have to do every once in a while, just sort of adds to the drama of things going on. Our characters, or especially sort of Aang, is sort of distraught at the idea that they're going to have to go on their separate ways, even especially since they just sort of got back together here. So no, I thought this was a really cool way, a really interesting way, a fun way to sort of add a bit of drama to, what's coming up without, making it seem too sort of, I guess you could say, like overbearing. Like it's drama, but it has sort of purpose and things that are going to happen. And a lot of it's stuff that we do want to see and that has been set up before. So, and, getting to mastering the Avatar state is a very sort of important thing to do. And our characters have always wanted to see, their family and stuff like that. So it's definitely, a good way to go about things and to make it sort of more intriguing for things to come.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the setup is all very, very clear here about kind of where we're heading for in the finale. And on the next episode of the podcast, of course, we're going to be doing K306, the second part of that arc on the Korra side of things, and the next episode of Avatar, so 219, The Guru. So that will be a pretty fun one here, as we're making pretty good progress, and it's probably looking at this point like we probably will absolutely finish the rewatch before Avatar Studios content comes out, which felt crazy at the time given the cadence we were doing them at. But yeah, delays lead to stuff like this happening. But of course, there will be other stuff to talk about. There's going to be 2 novels coming out, actually 3 novels with Light It Up as well. There'll be more comics in the future. Lots of stuff still to come. But we're just waiting on announcements still, even if we know Avatar Studios still a little bit further off into the future. But yeah, that's been episode 291 of the Avatar Online podcast. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye-bye.